I'm Anashua Sinha, and I'm a senior principal scientist here at Merck Research Labs. I trained in internal medicine, pediatrics, and infectious diseases, and I'm currently the lead clinical director for the Influenza program, and I'm super excited to be talking to you today about our phase 3 study, SMART. So let me start with why is this important? It's important because we're talking about a uniquely vulnerable population. That's to say, children under 2 years of age with chronic lung disease, congenital heart disease, or other conditions that put them at increased risk for severe RSV disease when they're entering that second RSV season. It's why we needed a detailed evaluation of safety and pharmacokinetics of influenza for this population in the second RSV season. So turning from the importance of it to what we learned that influenza continues to demonstrate strong clinical data for this population in terms of safety, and that the pharmacokinetics that we observed enable us to bridge, that is to say extrapolate, to the efficacy that influenza already demonstrated in the phase 2b/3 CLEVER study that I mentioned earlier. Because of the data that we were able to document in the SMART study, we're in a position, as I just mentioned, and in the process of seeking an expanded indication for the second RSV season from both US FDA and EMA. My hope is that pediatricians are educating all families with infants about RSV and their prevention options, because all infants are at risk for RSV, whether they're healthy or have the conditions that we're talking about that constitute the study population for SMART. Now, turning from that to the families with high-risk infants. They're the infants that pediatricians have special worries about, right? Because of these babies' underlying health conditions. So I hope that pediatricians are excited that they now have safe and effective options to help protect these uniquely vulnerable children from RSV. And that wasn't necessarily the case just a few years ago. We're very encouraged by the clinical findings from SMART and the potential for influenza to be an important part of RSV prevention for these children. In all, it's a very interesting and exciting epoch for pediatricians as they're counseling their families. When you ask that question, I think back to my own training in pediatrics, which was many years ago, as you can see. And I wish we had access to the RSV prevention options that we now have at that time, but we didn't. Back then, every winter meant that the emergency room and the pediatric ward would fill with children who had RSV bronchiolitis and RSV pneumonia, which means that pediatricians are now in an exciting and very different epoch. In terms of decision making, I would start by saying that immunization decisions should always be guided by rigorous science and comprehensive data. And so I think that the phase 3 SMART study results that we're talking about today add to the evidence base that pediatricians have when they're talking to families with young children under 2 years of age who are uniquely vulnerable to RSV because of their underlying health conditions. RSV remains a top reason why infants are hospitalized every year, and I'm excited about what the future holds in terms of prevention. I hope that pediatricians feel encouraged by the results of the SMART study and how these data can support their decision-making, their efforts to help reduce the burden of RSV, and how they counsel and work with the families they care for.